Yes. Okay. The recording has started. And I'm here with Miss Gabrielle Bauer, the author of the book Blindsight is 2020. How are you doing, ma'am?
Very well, thanks. Thanks for having me on your show.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for reaching out. I really appreciate that. I like it when people reach out and are like, hey, man, I'd like to chat with you. I'm like, all right, cool. Let's do it. Because sometimes I don't know who I'm supposed to reach out to. So I'm like, all right. So, um, let's get into your background a little bit because I'm sure my audience isn't completely familiar with who you are.
I've been a freelance health writer and medical writer for 28 years. I write for both consumer audiences, general audiences, and health professionals. I've also written, well, Blindsight is 2020 is my third book. I wrote two other books before that. And I live in Toronto. Um, But Blindsight was published by an American nonprofit, the Brownstone Institute. Here, I'll
Mm,
hold up a copy here. There we go.
yep. And that's Jeffrey Tucker works with them, right?
That's right. Yeah,
Yeah.
he was the one who founded it in 2021
Right.
as a direct result of the COVID policies.
When what caused you to want to write this book? Because a lot of the COVID books I've seen coming out are really like kind of tied into conspiracy or um, which I'm not saying they're wrong. I'm just
Yeah,
saying like that's kind of the angle they take,
yeah,
or they're really focused on the science and the
mhm,
medical and where everything went wrong.
yeah.
The first thing I said, I read the first chapter of your book because the sample's up at Amazon. So when I read the first chapter, I emailed you immediately and I was like, yeah, I'd love to have you on because you seem to have a real heart for people. And it really seemed like your focus on this book was discussing how it affected people. And that was really refreshing to me.
Thank you. And that is really, I think you nailed it. I wanted to do something different. I didn't just want to put out another book about the data and the science. I mean, there's so many books and articles about all that. And to me, the most interesting aspect of the pandemic response and the most troubling also, has nothing or very little to do with data. It
Mm,
has to do with the psychology of it, how and why the world went mad, how the government stoked fear. Why did all this happen? What were the ethical potholes, shall we say, in the response? And that's so important, and I don't think it's been talked about enough. And so that was that was always what preoccupied me the most, so that was naturally what I wanted to focus on the most.
And how did you've talked a bit about how COVID affected you and you were out of Canada. You were out of the country visiting friends in Brazil. Am I correct?
Yeah,
So
I was in.
how how did all that come together? Because that seems like that had to be kind of scary, not knowing how things were going to work out when you were trying to go back home.
I wasn't scared at all. I can't, I'm not going to lie. I was never scared of the virus. Now, I always believed it was real. I never believed that it was, a hoax or anything like that, but I was never scared of it.
Mm.
I was 63 when this all started. I'm 66 years old now, thankfully in, good health. But I don't think that's the reason. It's just, it's, it's not the kind of thing that I worry about overly. It didn't seem, first of all, when I did look at the data, it didn't seem overly um, worrisome. I mean, obviously it's a threat to some people, but it didn't seem like something that was worth, me sort of devoting my whole life to worrying about it. So I just didn't. I never did. And so when I was in Brazil, I wanted to stay. I was visiting friends that I'd made 2 years earlier when I lived there for 5 months, and but then as soon as I got there, I got there on the first day of March, and a couple of weeks later, not even, it just the whole thing locked down in the city where I was living as well. And a lot of my friends were no longer willing to see me because they were scared too. I had one friend who was very alternative, and she offered to put me up for a month. She thought the whole thing was only going to last a month, in her like house with all her chickens and dogs and whatever. And that was very tempting. But I have a husband at home, and I didn't want to leave him alone. And of course, Canada's Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, was telling everyone to come home, come home, come home. So I
Mm,
thought, well, what if I'm stuck here for I don't know how many months? I'm still working and everything. So I got myself to Sao Paulo and I waited like 48 hours before I could get a flight back home and made it home. And then as soon as I got home, my husband, was initially a lot more scared than I was. As soon as I got home, he was like, 6 feet, 6 feet, And I went down to the basement, quarantined for 14 days. So I had a lot of time to think about all this.
mm. Yeah, that's. I was over the road truck driver when all this hit, and I was already podcasting, but I was driving over the road,
Mm,
and it would be weird because I would drive from Texas to Louisiana and everything was normal. But when you come back from Louisiana, they would have checkpoints at the Texas border. And if you weren't a truck driver, if you were just a civilian, you would have to pull over and they would test you as you entered the state of Texas.
oh, wow.
And it wasn't like that for long, but it was long enough to be burned in my memory what that looked like. It was weird, man. I was just like, this is really odd.
Can I ask you, what was your community, like the truck drivers community, if you're still connected to them? What was their general response, attitude to all this?
It was pretty lackadaisical. We really didn't. None of us really cared. It was
Yeah.
just kind of like, all right, man. Like we're truck driving by just by definition, you have to be a very independent person and
Mm,
almost almost completely autonomous.
yeah.
It's you don't. I mean, I had my dog with me, and that's about it. That was like the extent of my daily communications. Was my dog was with me, and so I would go into a truck stop and it would just be odd. I'd walk in, I wouldn't even think about it. I'd walk in there, where's your mask? I'm like, I'm not here to rob the place. Why do I need a mask? Like
Yeah,
like what are
yeah,
you talking about?
yeah, yeah.
And we live in a very small town. And there was one week because my wife works from the house and she was going into town. And there was one week where the grocery store was like, you have to wear a mask to come in. And my wife is very, very much an extrovert. She likes dealing with people. The expressions on people's face really matter to her.
Mm,
And it really bothered her. Like the psychological damage that was done just over that week to her, it really bugged her.
mhm,
Like she hit a funk. She was like, working from home, going to the grocery store every day, buying my groceries for what I'm going to cook that night. That was how I socialized. That was how
mm,
I got out and I interacted with society. And now I don't even want to do that now.
yeah, yeah.
And so I really think the damage done to the psyche of people was is the greatest devastation. And this is why I was like so excited about your book.
Mhm. Yeah, I agree, and it's something that, some people just refuse to talk about. It's just, well, maybe it could help. Maybe it could help, save one grandma somewhere, even though, the evidence points against it. But it's just they refuse to look at the whole picture, at the costs and benefits about, is this the kind of society we want to live in forever? Do we want to live in a masked society? Is this what humans are all about? And it amazed me at the beginning that so few people were sensitive to that or were alive to that. It was just stay home, save lives, stay home, save lives, wear a mask, and I had always thought, I never thought that my thinking about all this was different than the average person's. I
Yeah.
sort of assumed that most people would react, or that I would react the same as most people. And when I found out that I was an outlier in this, it really, really shocked me. It took me
Right.
several weeks to even metabolize that, and then, maybe in Texas it was easier and fine, to find, but in Toronto it was really hard to find like-minded people, and I had to really go out of my way, which
Right.
I did, and I talk about that in the book. How I joined a Reddit community and later became a moderator in it called Lockdown Skepticism,
Mm.
and it eventually grew to 56,000 people, still very active today. And then in that group, it's a worldwide group. Here and there were some people from Toronto, and so I little by little invited them to form a Toronto group. We called ourselves QLIT, Questioning Lockdowns in Toronto. And we grew to over 100 people. And for a while there, we had a WhatsApp chat that just was continuous. It never slept, like 1,000 messages per day. We had meetups. We went to protests together. And here, like as I said, I'm 66 now. I'd never been to a protest before in my life. So here I am going to a freedom protest. It was pretty wild, and part of me was a little afraid. What if there's a client on the sidelines? What if there's a friend or something who's going to disown me when she sees me? But I managed.
All right. I'm sorry. I'm dealing with internet. Something just happened, and I'm just yeah.
Okay.
All right. Yeah. I think my Wi-Fi was acting weird, so I just pulled up my backup. So Canada had a lot more. It seemed a lot stricter, at least for us down here in Texas. I mean, there were moments where it was like, this is getting odd, and then it would like relax a bit, and then it get a little bit more strict, and then relax a bit. So it was kind of like when you read like Higgs and he talks about the ratchet effect. It was more like that down here in Texas. Whereas from what I saw with like countries like Canada or Australia, countries like that, it was just full blown. They were just coming at y'all.
It was. We had some long, long lockdowns. I think the last one lasted like 6 months or something. It was really intense. And it's interesting though that the Freedom Convoy originated in Canada of all
I want to
places.
talk about that.
Yeah, because Canadians have this reputation of being so polite and so orderly, and
Mm.
the Canadian motto, for heaven's sake, is peace, order, and good government. I mean, can you think of anything more dull and boring? But but nonetheless, the truckers in Canada, they kind of inspired this whole um, rebellion
Mm. Yeah.
against the order. And I talk about that in one chapter of the book as well. A lot of my friends come from the left, and I suppose I originally come from the left. I consider myself politically homeless now. But a lot of my friends, when they learned that I supported the convoy, they were just shocked, because in their world, this cannot be, so it was sort of beyond their experience. I remember actually not long ago, I was in the States, because my family in the States is also very far left, and I was in New York um, for the 95th birthday of one of my uncles. And then it was like right after my book had been published earlier this year. And I haven't told anyone in the family about it, but I thought, well, here I am, I might as well mention it. So I, said, well, by the way, I've had a few issues with the COVID policies, and I wrote a book about it. And then my cousin turns to me and said, but surely you didn't support the convoy, did you? So I thought, well, may as well be honest here. I said, well, yeah, as a matter of fact, I did. And he didn't even he didn't even answer. We changed the subject because I thought it didn't compute in his mind,
Mm.
you know. But again, I talk about a journalist who went to the Ottawa protests and spoke with the truckers. My own son went to the event also in Ottawa with some friends of his, and so I actually interviewed him for the book. I asked him what it was about, because all the mainstream media came out with this, racist and misogynist and
Mm-hmm.
Confederacy flags, and I mean, of course, you have a huge protest. There's always going to be, like a bad actor or two.
All right.
Someone's going to show up with a, swastika or something. But it wasn't about that at all. I spoke firsthand with my son, and I got the firsthand reports from this journalist who spoke directly to the truckers. And she said, and I agree, I never really saw the whole convoy as just about the vaccine mandates. I saw them as something much bigger. It was just a cry of protest against the massive overreach
Yes.
in the Canadian government. And so I think that, although Trudeau stopped the whole thing, he invoked the Emergency Act in order to haul the truckers out of permeate the country's psyche somehow, and I think it led to things loosening up, which they did shortly after that. So I think it did have an indirect benefit, even though the truckers didn't, like on the face of it, achieve their objectives.
My buddy he's from Canada originally, but he lives in upstate New York. Gordon McGill. He's written some articles for Newsweek. He started his own podcast recently.
Hmm.
He was on top, and I think the trucker protest is kind of what pushed him over the edge of like, I'm going to start doing this, because he's a truck driver.
Oh,
And
nice.
he's one of those lifelong truck drivers. His dad was a truck driver. His grandpa was a truck driver. It's in his blood. Like, he's driven road trains in Australia. He's done ice road trucking in northern Canada. Like, he's been all over the place driving truck. And so when he saw this taking place, he went to Canada and
Oh, did he?
it. Yes, he went to
Wow.
Canada and he covered it, hung out with his dad and some of his old friends, and they were all there. And he's been paying real close attention to it. And when the Canadian government went in and shut down a bunch of people's bank accounts, they still haven't opened them up. There's still people that can't get their money. They can't access their funds because they were engaged in that trucker protest.
That was so ridiculous, because when those people donated money, they were not doing anything illegal. And then the Canadian government retroactively decided the protest was illegal, and so then froze their accounts, which is like as unfair as you can get.
Right. Right. And I always tie that back to this ESG model that we see being shoved down our throats, and where the governments have weaponized the corporations and the financial institutions in order to force compliance on the people, instead of using police and SWAT and force in that manner. What they're doing is they're using the financial system to push you into compliance.
Yeah, it's horribly autocratic. Yeah, it's just, yeah.
So I don't know. Let's not get off on that tangent, because I can go on about that for hours. You talked to a lot of really interesting people when it came to this book, and one of the ones that like stuck out in my mind, I thought was really interesting, that you talked to was Zuby.
Oh,
I
yeah,
really
good
found
old
that
Zoom.
interesting that you were talking to like psychologists and psychiatrists and all these scientists, and then all of a sudden you get this rapper over here,
Right.
this
Well,
comedian over here. Like, it's just like,
well, that was very deliberate, I have to say, because again, this whole mantra that we were fed was follow the science, follow the science, follow the science, and that did not sit right with me from day one. Literally, it made no sense, because um, a pandemic is not just a scientific problem to solve; it's a human event. And so, if you're going to try to manage it, you've got to manage mental health. You've got to figure out how to let people somehow connect with each other. You've got to figure out, those who are religiously inclined. What do you do about that? What do you do about culture that's so important to many people? And all that was thrown aside. It was just follow the science. And fortunately, I spoke with some scientists who get it, who completely agreed. In fact, one of the scientists that I feature in the book, Mark Woolhouse, epidemiologist in Scotland, he said the pandemic was run too much by epidemiologists. I mean, we need all these other people at the table. We need the mental health experts at the table, the historians, the economists. We need all these people. And they were not allowed to weigh in, or if they tried, it was just follow the science. So that was one of the deliberate aims of my book is, yeah, sure, I have some scientists there, because there were some important scientists, dissidents, who, stepped out and were courageous enough to challenge the COVID orthodoxy. But then those other people, novelists, philosophers especially, I think they have such important insights about the pandemic. So I wanted to showcase them, because yes, as you say, a lot of pandemic books kind of focus on the science, the data.
it was so interesting to me that they tried to use the humanitarian language to sell the lockdowns and the masking and everything else. but when you would point out like the economic damage you were doing, shutting down all these small businesses, only these large corporations are continuing to thrive. Like, is this humanitarian? How are you being compassionate to these people who have struggled for 20 years to build a mom and pop business, and it's being shut down and they're never going to be able to open it up again? I always think
Exactly.
about that girl in
Exactly.
the hairdresser in Dallas. I
Hmm.
always think about her, who got
Hmm.
arrested, and the Governor Abbott here in Texas eventually pardoned her, but they arrested her for opening up her salon.
Hmm. I completely agree, and I have to say I felt more sorry for those people than, for somebody who was clearly nearing the end of their life and maybe died of this virus as opposed to another. I actually felt worse, about the people who lost a whole life's work and who
Mm.
have to feed their families and were unable to do so. I'm not, and I make it clear in the book, I'm not suggesting we just let people die or anything like that. Of course, we do what we can to protect our loved ones, but we don't destroy civilization in the process.
Well,
And
and that was the problem, is a lot of this wasn't individuals or families protecting loved ones. That's not what was happening. It was like it was almost like white blood cells attacking a virus. Like it was so odd to watch. It just I kept thinking of Orwell's like 2 Minutes of Hate, type
absolutely.
idea. And I was just like, this is so weird.
No,
Like
I know.
if I have worked for the last 30 years to build something, you're telling me I have to shut this down to
Hmm.
save the life of somebody who might have 2 years left.
Right. Or 6 months, or might just, exactly. It's exactly. And you know what? I mean, you obviously get it, and I've met people all over the world who get it, but it still continues to amaze me that so few people were alive to these arguments. It was just stay home, save lives. Like there was just something so off about it. So it was such a reductionist view of life and living. Like what are we here for? We're going to cancel living to save lives. Okay, how does that
Right.
work?
Existence is not living.
Exactly.
It's like
Exactly.
it's
And
two
I
different
called it
things.
this obsession with preserving metabolic life. That's what I call it. Because that's not what living's about. And I remember talking to like online with someone else, another writer who's in a writers group, and somebody who I not a close friend, but someone I've seen and talked to quite a lot, and liked. But I expressed my frustration with what the Canadian government was doing, and then she literally responded, um, "I'm going to do what the government wants for as long as it takes. I'm This is, whatever they ask, I completely trust they have our best interest at heart. I will not question, and it's a different world now." And
Mm.
that just shocked me to the core. It was, again, I think it ultimately boils down to a different worldview. And
I'm kind of a your ideal Southerner. I don't trust anything those people say. I don't trust a word. They could say anything. They could be like, "Oxygen's good for you." I'll be like, Screw that. I'm doing the research." Like, I don't know what you're trying to get me into, man, but I ain't buying it. It's just I'm just so distrusting of the authorities. I just and I always have been. I always
Interesting. I like the exact opposite. But it just shocked me to think that someone intelligent just could entrust her whole future and life to whatever the
yeah.
authorities said she had to do.
That
You know?
was the really strange part, is people that are intelligent and that have been exposing government corruption for so long,
Hmm.
suddenly just sort of like, no, they're right. They're right about
Yeah.
wait. Hold on.
Yeah. And the
I
mainstream.
was just reading your article 2 days ago where you're pointing out how the government lied us into Iraq, and now you're telling me.
Yes, and like the mainstream media performed as sort of a government prop. The mainstream media is supposed to, like, their role in society is to push back, to act as a counterweight, but they did none of that.
Mm.
On the contrary, they propped up the story and they scolded anyone who questioned it in any form, even respected scientists. It's one way to achieve consensus, as I said. You silence all those who oppose the consensus. Well, of course, you're left with consensus.
But you had been writing about medical stuff for a while, right?
Yeah, I've been, healthcare and medical writer for 28 years.
So
Um,
did you notice that your colleagues or people that you had built relationships with over the last couple of decades were suddenly like turning on you and looking at you cross-eyed?
Interestingly enough, it has not been bad with my friends and associates and colleagues in person. Online is another story. I mean, online, I was called things that I'd never been called before in my entire life. The usual sociopath,
Mm,
mouth breathing, Trump tard, negative IQ, just the crazy stuff. And I had to thicken my skin a little bit.
mm,
But these are people who don't know me, and these were in online discussions. When I first tried to express some of what I was thinking, this is what came back. But the people who know me, and who know that I'm not these things, whether it be friends or family or colleagues, I have not had a problem. And I have talked to people, not to all my colleagues, but to many of them, to the long-standing colleagues that I've worked with for years and years. I have told them, and some have even bought my book. And so far, so good. I haven't lost a friend. I haven't lost any colleagues. Some disagree with me, openly disagree, but it's always been respectful.
mm.
So I guess I consider myself fortunate because I know of a lot of people who have not had it that easy. I mean, perhaps in my case, I got vaccinated. The vaccines were not a big issue for me personally, and perhaps that's part of the reason. If I had, decided not to get vaccinated, maybe I would have suffered more in that regard. I certainly come out against the mandates, and my position evolved when it comes to the vaccines. When the vaccines first came out, I thought, and even the mandates, I thought, well, it's not that different from school mandates. I never had an issue with getting my kids vaccinated. And so it just wasn't a burning issue for me. But then as I, reflected and talked to people, because I have a lot of unvaccinated friends, since there's obviously an overlap between anti-lockdown and not vaccinated. And then as I also interviewed people for the book, bioethicists and so forth, I did come to change my position to be much more against the mandates.
Mm.
And that's sort of where I fall now, because I think, without bodily autonomy, we really don't, it's such a foundational principle of a free society. And if we don't have that, then we can't call ourselves a free society. And I also think if a product is good, it will sell itself.
Right.
It's just market economics. So
Yes.
if you have to use that much coercion to sell a product, there's something wrong.
Why
Um,
is it so important to you that I put this in my body? Like that's my thing. It's like, hold on. If it were a good product, you wouldn't have to force me to do it. I would be able to see the what happens and make my own decision.
right, right,
Why do you think you should be able to force me to do something that I'm resistant to? I'm just
yeah,
hesitant. There haven't been
yeah,
the testing. It's kind of I'm just kind of like, and this cost my mom 6 figures a year.
really,
Yes, she lost a job and an old 30 a friend of 30 years that she had been kind of that had always drug her with him when he would go to new companies. He would be like, You're coming with me because she was so good at what she did. And they ended up letting her go. And then
mm.
they tried to tell her, Will you quit? And she's like, I didn't quit. Y'all said I had to put this in my body. And
Yeah,
our her thing was I have an aunt that got vaccinated. And 2 months later, she ended up with blood clots and was in the hospital. I
yeah,
have another cousin that got vaccinated. A few months later, she was in the hospital with blood clots. I have a best friend that got vaccinated, was in the hospital. I don't want to put this in my body because
yeah,
I'm not certain what is happening
yeah,
to these women.
yeah,
Why is it a coincidence? Possibly, but let's not push the subject here. Let's
right,
let's like
yeah,
take a step back and think about this. And they
yeah,
were like, no, you're either getting vaccinated or you don't have a job. And then when she
yeah,
refused to get vaccinated, they're like, well, we don't owe you anything as far as unemployment because you quit. And it's like, no, I didn't quit. You told
Right.
me I had to inject something into my body I was not willing to inject into my body.
Hmm.
And so she did end up going and working temp for a while, probably 6, 8 months, and then she was able to get another job. But I
Oh,
mean,
good for her.
ultimately, it cost her $30,000 a year.
Yeah. Yeah. No,
Yeah.
that's terrible. Um, and it really is a question of the degree of coercion too. Like vax mandates have existed before, and they exist, in some jurisdictions for school and all that, but it's not that difficult to get around them. It's just basically like a default.
Mm,
People are expected to take the vaccine, but like for school children. But if they don't, as I say, if the parents don't want to for whatever reason, it's not that hard to get around. But here it was, jab or job,
mhm,
and jab or livelihood. So extremely coercive beyond, like, I know for the smallpox vaccine mandate that they had for a while, and I talk about that in the book too. It was people who were not willing to take it got a fine, which was equivalent to about $150 in today's dollars. So that's very different from saying, well, your whole job and career is gone.
mm. Well, I think what a lot of people had issues with is where they were openly admitting that this was experimental, that we had no data on this, like no extensive data on what what the possible repercussions were. And people were like, okay, well, I want to wait. I,
Yeah.
I I'm not willing to just jump in and just stick any random thing in my body. And I don't think that's stupid by any stretch of the imagination, you know?
No, not at
Yeah,
all.
it's like,
Mhm.
all right, I
Mhm.
understand. Like, I didn't get vaccinated. I mean, nobody ever told me I had to, and I was just kind of like, whatever, I don't care, you
Yeah.
know. Like, it's kind of like I walked into. It was funny. You might find the humor in this. I do have a sick sense of humor, so it
It's
might just
okay.
be
I can
one of
take
those situations.
it.
But I walked into a tobacco store
Yeah.
to buy tobacco because I roll my own cigarettes, and so I walk in to buy tobacco, papers, and filters, and the guy looks at me, he goes, "Put on a mask." I'm like, "Dude, I smoke. Do you think I care about my lungs?" Like, come on, man. I mean, this isn't the this isn't the grocery store or a nursing home, bro.
Yeah, no. No, for sure. Um, but one thing I have to say, even when at the beginning, when I wasn't as much against the mandates, and right from the start, I decided I was never going to shun anyone who didn't get vaccinated,
Mm,
never going to exclude them from my social circle, and I was never going to ask anyone their vaccination status. Like, I felt very strongly about that. There was this whole, I don't know, it was a few months, certainly in Canada, where this fervor against people who didn't get vaccinated just grew and grew. And it culminated when there was this front page spread in the Toronto Star, a very
mm,
liberal paper, with quotes from people who were so angry at unvaccinated people, like, I wish they would all just die, let
yeah,
them lick the COVID virus and fall to the ground. Unbelievable stuff.
right.
It just built up to this crescendo. I never wanted any part of that. And
Yeah, it almost became a religion.
oh, completely. Yeah.
It was scary, like, just watching. It's because I've been at the Libertarian Institute. I'm with the libertarian community, so that's why I know
Mm.
Jeffrey Tucker and all those people.
Mm.
So I've been around that since 2016. And so one of the things we always talk about is how susceptible people are to authoritarianism. And it's like, okay, here it comes. This is it. These people are going nuts and they're coming for us, you know? And so
Absolutely.
it caused a lot of people in the libertarian community to step back and go, if they're going to try to use force against me to do this to me, I'm going to use force against these people. I'm not afraid of these people. And
Mhm.
so that's part it at least attributed significantly to the division that's going on in this country. I mean, there are
Mhm.
other things that are going on culturally, but
Yeah, no, I know. I follow it for
there's
sure.
there is a significant amount of that division that comes from
Yeah.
you you were willing to put me in a gulag because
Yeah.
I didn't want to wear a mask or I didn't want to get a vaccine.
Yeah.
Like,
No.
nah, bro. Like, we're this is a game you don't want to play because some of us are mean, you know. So,
Yeah, there were some disappointing institutions for sure. Like the ACLU was one of them.
mm,
They really, they ran a whole piece. I think they wrote a white paper justifying, why vax mandates were a way to return our freedoms to us. And I
yeah,
questioned that in my book. Like, wait a minute, are these freedoms contingent, or are they part of sort of the fabric of the society? Do they have to
right.
be returned to us, or are they actually, well, what Americans call inalienable? So yeah, that was pretty wild. And I know in the book I devote one chapter to that whole idea of the authoritarianism. I don't know if you know Matthias Desmet, the Belgian psychology professor.
Haven't
He was
gotten
the
to
one.
that part of your book yet.
Well, it's fairly close to the beginning, but he is the mass formation guy.
I feel bad. I'm reading 6 books right now, so
Ah,
it's like I just hadn't
totally
quite
fine.
made it all the way
Yeah,
through.
no rush. There's no rush. But yeah, no, he was the um, man who coined the term mass formation, or
Hmm.
certainly popularized it, which
Oh
is really
yes, I
a
remember hearing you talk about this with Jeffrey Tucker. Yes, go
yeah,
ahead. I'm
yeah,
sorry.
which is
Yeah.
a more contemporary word for groupthink or mob psychology.
Mm,
And he talks about the roots of that in society. What are the conditions in society that make people susceptible to that? When people don't have enough meaning, they don't have enough meaning in their own lives, wherever it comes from, and there's sort of this baseline unrest. And he talks about how the conditions were ripe for that during COVID, and that's his interpretation of what went on, which I largely agree with. I really, really believe that there was this mass psychology groupthink event that happened with people. Um,
I'm trying to stay out of conspiracy
no,
theories.
I know. I was just
Because
yeah.
the way my mind works is you start talking about this, and the first thing I think of is Edward Bernays propaganda. And
Mm.
then I start going, and then I'm starting going down a rabbit hole from there within my own mind. And I'm like, okay, like I don't want to drag you into like
No, and you know what?
where
I respect everyone's views on this, and my mind is actually the opposite in that way. I'm not at all conspiratorially oriented. I'm sort of the last person who's going to see a conspiracy, which is not to say. I mean, I certainly see that there was a lot of malfeasance that happened along the way with COVID, but to me, it's a stretch to believe that this whole thing was somehow orchestrated, because it wasn't just in the States, it was in practically the whole world. So yes, you'd have to have this master puppeteer, like, yes, it could be the World Economic Forum, but you'd have to have these master puppeteers directing all these disparate countries with completely different political systems and aspirations and all that. And it just seems like too much of a stretch to me. This is where I land now.
you know what
That's
the
it.
word,
But
you if you went back, like, because I was reading the World Economic Forum a lot at that time.
mhm.
If you went back and looked at their website from 2019, 2020, all that, they were bragging about the countries that were adopting their recommendations.
Right.
And they were putting it out there that, hey, yeah, we're telling these countries to do this and they're doing this. And one of the things that struck me as odd, and I'm not gonna, like I said, I won't drag you down the rabbit hole, but it's just something to think about. One of the things that struck me as odd is the book COVID-19 and the Great Reset came out
Yes.
in March of 2020, as soon as the epidemic hit. And you're like, what? You're like, how do you publish it that fast?
Was it actually in March? I thought it was a little later, but
Yeah,
okay.
it might have
Uh,
been April or
yeah,
May, but it was
yeah,
right there in that time
yeah,
frame.
yeah.
I remember reading it, but I was reading articles on the Great Reset from Time Magazine in 2019.
Mm, mm.
So he just added COVID-19 to it as,
Yeah,
oh, wait, this is a way we can introduce all this stuff.
yeah, no, there's no question that it was, using the crisis as an opportunity.
Right.
I guess the question is, was the whole
Rahm
crisis
Emanuel
orchestrated,
style.
or was it just used? So, yes, we could talk about that,
Yeah.
but
Yeah. But
yeah.
um what have you learned the most about people whenever you started digging into this? I mean, what there had to be, I heard you talk about like a type A and a type B
Yeah.
when addressing this. What was the one thing that you learned the most about people?
I think people on either side talk about how they're disappointed in the human race. So, I know people on the other side, on side A, like I see them talking online also how they're so disillusioned with people. They thought people were more caring, but no one wants to wear a mask anymore. And then there's people on my side who are equally disillusioned and think, people want this kind of biomedical world. They want to turn the whole world into a hospital. They want to reduce human life to just safety. They want to discount all the things that make life, interesting and meaningful. So I always come back to the same thing that, there's just different worldviews that fuel these different positions.
Mm,
I've never really deviated from that belief. And I think the big learning experience for me was that a lot of people don't think like me about this, and that a lot of people have a very different view of life. Even though I don't consider myself a religious person,
mm,
seems that my view of life is maybe a little bit closer to the religious view of life, because I have actually gotten to know more religious people since taking this position,
yeah.
and I've come to understand them better. Um, so that's been very interesting to me, because as I say, I still don't consider myself religious, but I just cannot identify with that biomedical view of life, which the philosopher Giorgio Agamben, which I feature in the book, he talks about that at all. And I think that's what also shocked him is this. He talks about bare life, how
Mm.
suddenly the world was so focused on bare life at the expense of living, at the expense of meaning, at the expense of communion, all these things. And so yeah, it's and it's something that I still sometimes shake my head and I think, how did this all happen? Why were people so ready to go there? And I don't know about you, but I don't feel confident that it's not going to happen again.
Yeah.
And I think that's why I wrote the book, and that's why I'm going to keep talking and writing about it, and that's why I think a lot of people at Brownstone as well feel the same way, that this is by no means over. We have to keep talking and writing about it, and just to raise awareness to hopefully erect some barriers, to this happening again.
I'm a I want to add a third, I want to add a C personality into that. That
Okay.
that would be me. I'm more of a cynic. I was like, "Oh yeah, I already knew people suck." So, uh, but like that's part of the reason I have such a great sense of humor about things because it's like,
Yeah, no,
what
that's
am I gonna do? Like, what can I do? It's
that.
like,
I think that's great. I would call it also absurdism, which I
yeah.
really respect. Ability to sort of step back and laugh at yourself and laugh at others and laugh at the human
Oh, I'm
folly.
hilarious. I'm hilariously stupid. I am so retarded half the time. I'm so stupid.
Well, no, I really respect that. I mean, people who take themselves too seriously, and that was part of the whole response. There was a certain cloying, off-putting earnestness about it
Mm.
that just
I was making a joke there for a while that the boomers had finally monopolized power to such a
mm,
degree they weren't afraid of dying of the virus. They were afraid of losing power, so they had to punish the children in order to stay alive and keep power.
well, that's a terrible indictment of boomers. I'm right in the boomer cohort, of course, but
So are my parents. I still
yeah,
love them.
no, but as you know, not all boomers, subscribe to that model, and but I think it's a fair indictment. Some do, and that you bring up a really interesting point. This whole idea of expecting young people to sacrifice for old,
It's new.
that
That's a new idea.
that
That's
never worked.
never
And
been
that
a
that was
thing.
one of the things that made me recoil instantly and initially and
Yeah.
viscerally, like, no, we don't do that. We are supposed to protect our young. And that was, and it amazed me that again, that people didn't feel the same way. I have two kids, and they were just finishing university, at the time. They both graduated in 2020. And so they spent the last few months of their university careers holed up in their little apartments. My son was like a basement apartment with 2 inches above his head. I mean, that is really not good for mental health. That
Well,
is
I mean, you
horrible.
you coming home and being quarantined in a basement isn't good for mental health.
No, it isn't. But I
Yeah.
had the resources, and uh, but yeah, it's just so cruel and inhumane. And I talk about that. I devote one chapter to children in the book. Some of the things they made kids do, like kneel in the classroom so they wouldn't be touching their desks, or go outside in the cold, in the freezing cold, in case they were exposed to COVID. One young man with meningitis died because they wouldn't let him in the hospital because they thought he'd been exposed to COVID. I mean, when I hear stuff like that, it makes my blood boil. It's just
I heard
so psychotic.
I was up in Dallas, and I was doing a delivery to no, I was picking up from a Nestle vendor there. This must have been 2021, I guess. And I stopped at a truck stop to get fuel, and walk inside, and there's like, I don't know, 4-year-old little kid. Couldn't have been much older than 4, and wearing a mask that said "mask it or casket."
Oh yes. No, I know. Yep.
I
I
I
it's
must it must the cringe must have
Oh,
been
totally.
visible, because I was
Totally.
like, if that was a dude that did that to it was a mom. I didn't say a word, but I was like, if that were a dude that did that to a kid, I would be in their face. Like,
No, I know.
that
Yeah.
I
Well,
was so mad. I got out of that truck stop. The first thing I did is I texted one of my buddies. I was like, dude, you can't not believe what I just saw. He was like, man, this is insane. The things
mhm.
that were done to children, how it stunted development, not being able to see facial recognition, like, and the expression on faces, like the development that must have been stunted during this period. I mean, that's got to have ramifications down the road.
But to me, what's even worse than that is saddling children with this guilt, like, don't kill grandma. This idea that if you inadvertently transmit a virus, you're killing someone. That's also a new idea, and it's completely batshit because people have been inadvertently transmitting viruses since the beginning of time.
Right.
It is not killing someone, it is biology. It's sharing a planet with viruses. So again, implanting this idea in kids that, should they happen to inadvertently, again, I'm not talking about doing it on purpose, inadvertently transmit a virus, that they're killing someone, that's just craziness.
Yeah.
And, to saddle children with that guilt, um, so that whole narrative was, and now we still see it on Twitter, not so much in real life, but on Twitter, people are still calling each other murderers or eugenicists or whatever for not wearing a mask. You are contributing to the genocide of older and immunocompromised people. I mean, where did this stuff come from? Like, what did people do before COVID? These viruses existed. Um, it's it's just this whole new thread in the story that, I sure hope and I think that the Overton window is sort of shifting back towards sanity, less so online than in the real world. But I think in the real world, mercifully, we are seeing a shift. Like even in Toronto, which is fairly liberal city and all that, masks are certainly in the minority, even in the stores, and certainly outside you almost never see them. But it's calming down. And I go to a lot of medical conferences too. As a medical writer, I attend a lot of meetings and write reports and cover events at conferences. And these are all doctors, and virtually no masks. I'm talking about large medical conferences in the States.
Right.
So that's really encouraging. Obviously, the doctors have enough too.
Mm.
There's always some holdouts.
Yeah.
Find them.
My cousin's ER nurse. I mean,
Oh yeah.
yeah, she's had her issues with, and we've had conversations about some of the stuff she's seen, and she's like, I had a buddy of mine who I can't remember exactly what he did, but he works with people with lung disorders, and does all that stuff. And I haven't had him on in a while, but he had COVID twice. He got it twice. They were telling him you can't get it twice. He got it twice, and he was talking about his experiences and the things he was seeing, because he travels,
Right.
uh, for work in the medical field. And so, I mean, the medical side, we had a very good idea by mid 2020. They were getting a lot of stuff wrong in the medical side,
Yeah.
but it was that hive mind
Yeah.
that took over. As John Robb calls it, the what does he call it? I can't, the swarm. Um, and but yeah, it had this like serious hive mind, and I think that's what did the most damage, and that's why I really appreciate your book. Because have you had any experiences? You said that you've had some people that disagree with you that read your book, really may disagree with you and have conversations, but do you think it's reaching those people? Because I know you had said in your interview with Jeffrey Tucker that was one of your goals, was to reach
Yeah.
these people, write a book that was kind of even kill. I'm of the opinion you can't reach these people. Like
Yeah.
it's like a zombie horde. Like as
I,
far as I'm concerned, I look around, I'm like, what are y'all talking about, man? You
I think
know?
there's some unreachable people, and I think there is a built-in problem with books like these sort of resistance books, is that it's a lot easier to get on media that is in some way, countercultural, or
I'm
than to get
sorry.
on the large
I
mainstream.
apologize.
No, it's good. I'm saying that I've had lots of wonderful media interviews, but it's always with institutions that are sort of free thinking.
Mm.
Um, and so I meant easier in the sense that it's a lot harder to get on, you know, mainstream media.
Yeah,
The,
yeah. No,
the
I know. I'm just playing. I'm just
yeah, no. So, but that's
I
what I
don't
mean, and
take
that
I take life way unserious.
yeah,
That's a
that's
big problem of mine. My wife gets on to me all the time. Why aren't
that's
you
not a
taking this
problem at all.
seriously? Oh, I'm just like,
It's not a problem. But that's still a challenge, and I'm working on that. But I'm saying that I've had much greater success, um, getting interest from media, that is somehow counter narrative in some way. Um, but when it comes to individuals, yes, I've reached out to individuals and to book clubs. Like my brother, he's actually a cardiologist, and he's in a book club, and they're going to invite me to talk about the book. And so, on a small scale, yes, I think I'm reaching some of those people. Um, Still working on reaching the mainstream on a larger scale. That's the big challenge, but chipping away at it. So, yeah.
yeah. Yeah, it's got to be very difficult, I mean,
Yeah.
I've been podcasting since 2018. Nobody in the mainstream even acknowledges me. So don't feel bad. It's not just you.
Hmm.
It's
Yeah.
a lot of us out here going, "Hey, hello. Do
Yeah.
you see what's
Yeah.
happening?
Yeah.
We're not crazy, I promise." But yeah, so
Yeah.
have you had any success reaching out to any of the mainstream people that may show interest and just haven't gotten you on as of yet? Is there any bites like from like let's say a Glenn Beck or a Tucker Carlson or anybody like
Oh,
that?
well, I mean, I don't consider that mainstream. I guess I consider that more, well, the conservative outlets, not Glenn Beck and Tucker Carlson yet, but yes, I've certainly had success with conservative outlets.
Oh, okay.
I guess when I say mainstream, I mean sort of the center left, that mainstream media that uh, dominates the intellectual discourse.
Okay. Yeah.
So that's what I mean when I said mainstream. So left-leaning outlets, it's more challenging. Again, even
You
even
might
though
have
it's
better luck with like a Greenwald or a Taibbi
yeah, and
getting
and
them to
actually
acknowledge.
those are two people that are featured in the book. There's a chapter in which I feature the two of them, and then Toby Young. It's a chapter about
Yeah.
political orientation,
Yeah.
how this is not really a left-right issue, but it has become a left-right issue.
Right.
And in fact, if you actually count it up, I have 46 people featured in the book. I don't think there is a preponderance of right leaning or left reading or leaning. They're all across the political spectrum.
Mm.
But again, there is this idea that, if you're right wing, you believe in this, and if you're left wing, you believe in that.
You had mentioned earlier on, and I'll let us close down here pretty soon because I don't want to keep you too long. Um, you had mentioned earlier on that you come more from the left, and being from Canada, that's kind of expected. I don't mean to be rude. It's just kind of the way things are in Canada, and I understand that. And I
And
have
not in Western Canada though. Western Canada is very right leaning, but I'm
oh,
from
really?
Eastern Canada. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
But I mean, I have friends from Canada and they're more on the right, but they acknowledge that this country is just what it is.
Yeah.
It's just the way it's going to be. Have you found that it's difficult for you to understand? Because what I've seen, and I'm coming from more of a libertarian standpoint,
Mm.
where I was watching and it's almost like I saw this switch where the left went from being kind of anti-government to the government is our friend and we have to trust them. And it was like, the hell just happened? And I
Totally.
think that's where Taibbi and Greenwald are coming from. They're like, wait a second. This has nothing to do with the left-wing issues or views that I'm familiar with. This is a completely different animal.
Completely agree. And there's that meme about, I think Taibbi talks about that. Like he hasn't changed, but everyone else has moved to this such weird version of left that he finds himself to be the most right-wing person in the room usually, but he hasn't changed any of his political views. It's like everyone else has shifted. There's this meme about a guy who stands still, but everyone else shifts. So suddenly he used to be left wing and he's now right wing. It's
Yeah.
crazy.
Yeah.
But as you say, I think again, this idea, the left has become against freedom. And that's where I can't get past that. So I feel so disillusioned in the West, in the left, I mean, um, that they have turned their back on classical liberalism, on the idea of freedom. So I can't forgive them for that. So it's been interesting for me because I have learned more about right wing thought, and I agree with some of it, don't agree with all of it. I still
Mhm.
consider myself firmly in the politically homeless camp, still trying to figure it out. I sometimes talk about left libertarian, if that's even a thing. So I'm still figuring it all out, but I've been very, very disappointed in the left, and I can't support them anymore. And I even wrote an op-ed about that made it into the Wall Street Journal about how, um, yeah, they've disappointed me too much.
One of the things I found, and this might assist you a little bit, is too many of us at I always say that Marx won. And what I mean by that is that we live in an era now where everything is political. And
Mm,
it's like, no, I'm not. I refuse to adhere to that. And
yeah.
so I'm trying to take back parts of my life from the political.
Mm,
So what do?
nice.
I raise chickens, I raise ducks, I have my dogs, I have my property, I garden, I doing
Mm,
things that are normal
mm,
human endeavors. Like I work,
yeah.
I don't spend all my time reading politics anymore. I
Mm,
did that for a long time and it got very stressful. I just it was bad for me mentally to do that
mhm.
all the time. I
I
try
think
not
that's
to
great.
make
That's great. Yeah, just to be connected to reality, to
yeah.
material reality. Yeah,
Oh,
yeah,
I try not to even whenever I do my podcast, I try not to even make them super political. I want to talk
right.
about like what we've learned, like what we can do, what actions we can take as individuals, as humans. And what I found is that there was a point, I don't know when that occurred, but when everything became political and then your political ideology became your identity.
Yes, yes.
And I've like you, I was agnostic prior to COVID, and I have since joined the Orthodox Church, become more Christian,
Mm,
and been following that path. And I
mm,
found by doing all these things outside of the political arena
mhm,
that it's really helped me psychologically with my
mm,
mindset and moving
mhm,
forward in my life. And my podcast has kind of changed a little bit, and things
mhm.
are, but I'm still me, and I'm still
Yeah,
just addressing subjects that I find interesting. But I'm not bogged down with
right.
so much stress, so much anxiety, because there are so many things out there I can't do anything about.
Mm, yeah,
And
that's
so I don't
great.
know if that helps you any, but it's something I've found is letting go of that political ideology as identity and just finding my identity
Yeah.
and then
No, I
and
completely
then
agree.
saying, I agree with this ideology for the most part, but it ain't who I am. Like,
Yeah.
you know,
No, that's very helpful and very true. I agree completely. This whole group identity obsession of the left is just, anathema to me. I can't
yeah,
accept it or,
yeah,
yeah.
I agree.
But
I get you. Well, I mean, plug whatever
it,
you got to plug. I don't know how, I mean, we could probably talk for hours. I mean,
yeah,
I'm
no,
in
it's
agreement.
great. I love talking to this conversation was just wonderful. I love talking to people from different backgrounds, from different, parts of the world, and it's been wonderful. So I really appreciate it.
Yeah,
And
well,
yeah, if anyone's
I'm
interested
gonna
in,
go kill some coyotes here in a bit. So I'm from definitely a different part of the world.
yeah. So, oh, and also I just learned that it is going to be available as an audiobook as well. So for people who prefer to hear books rather than to see them, that's coming soon.
I keep telling people that are telling me they're doing audiobooks, they got to get Dylan Mulvaney to read it because that seems like the best marketing strategy there is.
Oh, okay. Another can of worms to open, yeah.
I
Oh,
joke, I joke, I joke.
yeah, yeah, it's great.
So what other books have you written other than Blindside? Blindside 2020. Go
Yeah,
get
my
that
other
one for
books are
sure, people.
a long time ago though. So yeah, I wrote when I lived in Japan and learned Japanese and had a relationship with a Japanese doctor. So I wrote about that in a book called Tokyo My Everest. That was a long time ago. And then I wrote another book, another sort of creative nonfiction memoir type of book called Waltzing the Tango, largely about my misadventures in the workplace. And then, I found my groove as a freelance writer and have been doing that ever since.
And you're writing for the Brownstone Institute?
Yes, well, Brownstone published this book. I've written several essays for them as well.
Mm,
And we have a Brownstone writers group, and we communicate regularly online. So it's great. It's just that's the silver lining of COVID, and I think a lot of us have found that we have come into contact with people that we never ever would have met otherwise.
mm,
Even those people that I interviewed for the book, like Jay Bhattacharya, architect of the Great Barrington Declaration with two
mm.
others, Vinay Prasad, all these people, I've talked to them, I've interviewed them, they've talked to me, and I never ever would have met them, and had the privilege really of interacting with them otherwise. So definitely silver linings.
Yes, awesome. Well, y'all go grab the book, man. It's actually it's a very easy read, but it's very intriguing. It pulls you in very easily, and it flows very nicely. I really do like the book. Like I said, I wish I read more of it. I'm like 5 chapters into it, so I'm still working my way through it and several other things that I social media has killed my attention span. I'll
Oh,
read something for 10 minutes, I put it down, I grab something else. It's like that's how my whole day is.
oh, I know it's bad. I can relate. Yeah.
so so yeah, go grab the book. Blindside is 2020, and I'll make sure all the links are in the show notes, and we'll see if we can't get you some more sales. I appreciate your time. This was a great conversation. I always love talking to new people.
Likewise. Thanks again, Tommy.
Yes, ma'am. I'm going to end the recording. That is not